Thank you for making the time. My name is Gabriela Cervantes. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a program officer here at Oxfam Canada. I'm joining you today from the unceded and traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So this webinar is happening as part of the Inclusive Childcare for All project, which is an initiative funded by Women and Gender Equality Canada in partnership with Childcare Resource and Research Unit, Childcare Now, and Oxfam Canada. With introducing our panelists here today. And we will start with a question for them. What is the story, or what was your motivation to become a childcare advocate? So we'll start with Martha, since I have her here on my screen.
Can I remember back that far? I actually, to put it in short form, I was involved with what we now would call early learning in childcare before I became an advocate. I became involved with it as a researcher, actually, even before I immigrated to Canada. But I didn't really understand it until I became a parent. And actually, it was being a parent at the York University Cooperative Childcare Center, in which actual participation in the program was required, that actually made me an advocate. And it actually got me started on actually trying to understand how this really was a government responsibility. Is that my view of advocacy has always been that this should be a right, and that means that government needs to take responsibility for it, including the community. So I guess that's really what motivated me to be an advocate. It was being a feminist, but it was also being a parent and sort of understanding how it worked and how it didn't work. That's the short answer.
Thank you, Martha. So Martha is the founder of the Childcare Resource and Research Unit as well. Thank you so much for sharing, Martha.
Thank you.
Paul, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you, Gabriela. My name is Thơ Nguyễn, and I use pronoun she, they. I'm the Outreach and Communications Coordinator at Childcare Now. My origin story, while Martha struggles to remember how hers started, I'm the young one. I started recently. I think how I became an advocate has everything to do with me being personally connected to multiple aspects of the childcare movement as well. I decided to come to Canada 6 years ago to go to college. And I found my purpose in caring for young children and learning with them. So it's just a dream to be able to do that every day and getting paid for doing that. So I convinced myself that nothing would stop me from becoming an ACE, not the exorbitant tuition for international student, not even Canada's winter. But as soon as I graduated, I was faced with the actual impossible, finding an ECE job that came with livable wage and benefits and good working conditions. So sadly, I had to choose a decent life over my dream work. But advocacy gives me hope, I think. While I can't physically care for the children, I'd like to call what I'm doing right now caring out loud for them, as well as the educators and families who are all impacted by the childcare system that we're advocating for. So that's me. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you, To. And then we have Sonya Boyce.
Thank you. I come to the work a little bit differently. I'm not a parent and I'm not an educator. I spent most of my working life in the gender-based violence sector, working with women and children who are fleeing domestic violence, who simply could not afford childcare, which in turn obviously limits their access to education, it limits their access to employment. So without public childcare, women were often caught in this really vicious cycle as they tried to rebuild their lives. They wanted and needed to work to become financially independent, but without childcare, the best they could do was part-time jobs, low-paying jobs, that were quite precarious. And in the end, many women were faced with the impossible decision of returning to their violent partners. I came to the Coalition of Childcare Advocates of BC through a broader coalition called Feminists Deliver, which is a group of gender equity seeking groups in Metro Metro Vancouver. And now I work with the coalition to support their efforts to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so happy to listen to the different kind of pathways that that you took in order to become an advocate. And I know people here in our group have their own personal stories. So I actually forgot to mention, we do have a Q&A box in Zoom. So please feel free to share any questions you may have throughout the webinar, and we'll be answering them towards the end of during our panel discussion, as well as at the end of the discussion. Yeah, so without further ado, we'll start with the presentation of the research findings. The paper is titled Childcare for Whom? And I will be sending the link to this paper if you wanted to read it more in depth after this webinar through an email, and I'll also link it to the chat. I'll go ahead and share the presentation right now.
I'm here, Martha.
Okay, so we're going to share the presentation just as we share the authorship on this paper. I'm going to start by talking about once we formed this project, when we were forming this project, why did we put in a background paper, a research component? So the question really was there has long been a consensus that Canadian childcare has never been equitable or inclusive in the sense of bringing in different kinds of families. Some people have always been left out of childcare, but it was mostly anecdotal. And I mean, since I'm on the research side, I'm always really interested in sort of saying, you see here, we know this. It's more than, it's more than a few stories, that some groups of people are structurally and systematically left out. So CRRU's part of this project was primarily to put together this research. So one of the things that we really wanted to understand is we wanted to know what was known about this and what wasn't known, what were the holes. And I would say that it turned out that both things were true, as you'll see when Thơ talks about the findings. We really wanted this because it's good to write a paper, but we really want to use it to make early learning in childcare equitable and inclusive as CWELC is being rolled out. It's a great opportunity. And we have always seen it as being for all, and all means making public policy that makes it available and accessible to everybody. So we started with two main research questions. These were the questions. Which groups of women are underrepresented in regulated childcare? I always thought maybe we should say high quality regulated childcare, but we didn't actually go that far. But I think it's a theme that people should keep in mind. And we wanted to know more about the barriers that they face to having more equitable representation. And after some discussion, because there are different communities and groups of women that are more left out, but we decided to focus on newcomers who are clearly left out for a variety of reasons, racialized women and families, and mothers with disabilities who are almost never represented anywhere. And this is not to suggest that there are not other groups that are systematically and structurally left out, like Indigenous women and families, certain geographic communities like rural and remote, and so on. But this was our main focus, not the entire focus, as you'll see. So what we did in this paper was, here I'm sort of going to give you a little bit of the overview of the paper. We tried to put what we were doing with this project in context, and the context being that we have the opportunity, because we have this commitment to childcare for all that we have never had in the whole time that I've been working on Canadian childcare, which is about 50 years. We have opportunities that come out of that we really need to take advantage of. Then the paper talks about, and this is something that's very important to understand, is that Canada has always had a childcare market, not a childcare system. It's just a market like a market for shoes. If somebody wants it, if there's money, it will spring up. And if it doesn't, it's the idea that the supply will be responsive to the demand. What we know from having looked at this question for many years and people having written about it is that the market does not work for childcare. It doesn't work for the people who need childcare for their children. The paper talks about that in some more detail. Then the paper looks at a couple of really interesting frameworks that we came across in doing this work. And Thơ is going to talk about one of those because it really, really helps us inform the idea that accessibility is not only about getting a space that you can afford. That's necessary, but it's not sufficient, and that we need to go beyond kind of the normal way we think about this to outreach, to thinking about what families feel comfortable with, what they really need, how do they feel if do they feel welcome if they actually get childcare? That access is really a broad concept. And then the paper reviews the relevant Canadian literature, and I say here that it's peer-reviewed and literature that's reports, what you call gray literature, that doesn't make its way. We really did a pretty thorough job. And the paper includes a big list and a little description of all the literature that we reviewed, actually. It's an appendix. So you can kind of look at it, and some things that organizations did, like all kinds of things, but very little literature has actually looked at this question of equitable access actually yet. And we developed a background paper that we used at the project summit, which was back last May, that about 100 people came to. And then what we did was we turned around and we integrated what people said at the summit into the paper to kind of finish it off. And you'll see that basically there was a lot of congruence with the small amount of data and literature that we had found and what people were saying, even though it was pretty spotty. I mean, it's pretty clear that we were right, that this is an issue, that it's amenable to policy. And we tried to talk about some of the ways. And then the paper puts forward, we call them working recommendations because what they are is the Childcare Now roadmap to a quality childcare system, which is a high level kind of roadmap that we think needs to be put in place to put this, as you'll see, and as we will probably discuss, that is that there are places where we need to go further. So that's basically the research that we did, and here come the findings. So over to you.
Thank you, Martha. So here I am going to present to you a few selected findings that we think can be compacted in the scope of our presentation. So although there has always been a consensus that not everyone in Canada has access to childcare, as Martha mentioned, data has not been collected regularly and systematically to answer key questions about childcare access, such as which families use childcare, what kind of childcare they use, what route do they take to access care, and what are the barriers. So we think that the need for good childcare has become more pressing as childcare has become more of a mainstream issues and more that comes with considerable amount of funding. We see some data has begun to be available. So those that we feature in this paper were 3 surveys on unequal access to childcare from Statistics Canada and one from the Quebec Statistics Institute. So we found that these survey results, together with what we saw in the literature review and what we heard from community members at the project summits in May 2023, confirm that newcomers, racialized, and vulnerable families are experiencing barriers to full access to regulated high-quality childcare in Canada. And the barriers run from outright exclusion. For example, the Quebec government does not allow asylum seekers to use publicly funded childcare, to limited availability. So we know that regulated childcare was only available in 2021 to about 28.4% of children 0 to 5. And when supply is not sufficient, many families are being squeezed out of the system. And our research consistently shows that these families are more likely to be in a disadvantaged position, like low income, low education parents and immigrant families. And these characteristics, I must say, that often overlap. For example, immigrant parents and single parent families are more likely to be economically disadvantaged as well. And for many of these families, as Martha also mentioned, the high cost of care were of most concern. But however, we also found that what prevents these vulnerable families to access childcare goes beyond the cost itself. And in Quebec, as in many other provinces and territories, 2/3 of parents began looking for a childcare space before their child was even born. And obviously, those who wait is then at a disadvantage of finding a spot. And research in Quebec found that those who did not look for a space until the child was 1 year old were more likely to be low income with no high school diploma parent and single parent, or having both parents born outside Canada. So again, when supply is not sufficient, current programs and governments may use different mechanisms such as waitlist, the example that we just went over, or first come, first served mechanism to decide who gets the care. And these mechanisms that may seem neutral and fair are actually perpetuating inequity. So a lot of what we found here, I think is not new and unanticipated. However, when we piercing them together, we realize that in order to better understand and tackle the issue of unequal access to childcare, as well as to improve equal and inclusive access, we need to think beyond the standard policies, to think with all of these bits and pieces in mind, and ultimately that requires a comprehensive framework. So this brings us to our next point, which is the work of two academics, Vandenbroek and Lazari, who analyzed policy, academic, and practice literature from the European Union to identify and analyze the cases of unequal access in childcare. One of the frameworks that we chose to present to you today, because we think that their work is extremely important. They have observed that access or enrollment to childcare has often been studied from the parental choice perspective, which is embedded in a neoliberal policy context that treats social issues such as childcare as a matter of individual responsibility. So in response, they have developed this integrated concept identifying elements at 3 levels that in combination can lead to better understanding of equitable and inequitable access to quality. A reproduction of their framework with 13 practices categorized under 3 levels that address the 5 criteria that contribute to better access to for underrepresented families. And the 5 criteria are availability, affordability, accessibility, usefulness, and comprehensibilities. So here you can see at the policy level, public policies that address issues of availability, entitlement, and cost within a regulatory framework for quality are the most effective in reducing inequalities in enrollment or access. And at the provision level or the program level, we have to keep in mind that mechanism to address shortages of services can result, again, as I said, in disproportionate barriers to children from disadvantaged families. And then at the family or parental level, families with certain characteristics, such as low income, low education, those with language barriers may have less access to information about childcare or how to get a spot. And also for racialized families, they may not see themselves represented or do not feel welcome or included in childcare, in existing childcare programs. And that also play a role in their decision to whether to enroll to childcare or not. Well, I think I just threw out a lot of information, and I want to take a moment to see if folks have any questions or comments, or Martha, if I missed anything, please feel free to add in.
I can't think of anything that you left out, but people will probably have some questions. I guess one thing that I want to say is it's really clear from having worked on this and written this paper that it's not just one thing that will make the difference. One thing that is really important to keep in mind is that even universal childcare systems have inequity aspects to them. So I was actually part of a German comparative project on unequal access to childcare that's referenced in the paper. And Sweden was one of the cases where there is unequal access, even though Sweden has a really well-known universal childcare system. You know, the cost is really is low and geared to income. There's a lot of childcare. It's very good quality, but there's still unequal access. And I guess what I took away, and if you read the paper, you'll see this, is that you really do have to have different ways of approaching this. It's not just having, it's worse in a market system. It's worse when there are shortages. It's obviously worse when there's high cost, when it's unequally distributed around. But you also have to do other things depending on who the people are that are, that are needing childcare, which I assume should be everybody should have a chance to go to childcare. So that there are lots of sort of things that get to be, how do we outreach to this group of people? Does everybody know about this? Why is it that they're only approaching it after, when their child is a year old? It's that type of thing that we have to drill down on. I guess that's the only thing I would say. That's what I came from having done this piece of work. That's what I came away from, is that it's something that we have to do a whole bunch of work on, actually, to have an equitable, inclusive system.
Thank you so much, Martha and To. I feel we don't have any questions in the chat so far, but please do share any doubts that you may have. We'll be able to answer them. I think just following with this presentation, and we will be touching a little bit more in depth on each of the points that you presented. So now we just jump into some questions that I have prepared for our panelists today. And as I said, I'm going to be answering questions from the chat as well. So my first question for you, and I think it touches on what you presented already, but for new folks that maybe are newer to the movement and they need some more clarity around what is the Canada-wide early learning and childcare agreement, what is universal public early learning and childcare. So very key concepts as when we talked about childcare advocacy. So my first question is, in simple terms, what is universal public early learning and childcare? And how does the Canada-wide early learning and childcare agreement support this vision for childcare? And what are some of the actions or policies that need to be taken to fill in the gaps as if we want to build this universal system of childcare? And Martha, you can go ahead.
Well, I'm going to give the short answer because there's a lot of discussion to be had from this. But as one of the people who's been talking about, we want universal childcare for many years, there's always confusion about what that means. So here's what I think the advocacy movement means by it, is that it's aspirational, that what we want is a childcare system that anybody who wants it, any family, whatever type of family they are, whatever their circumstances are, whatever their children are, they should be able to get it in a reasonable way so that it suits them in a reasonable way. And then you get down to questions like, what are the languages and how does that fit in, and what are the cultures and things, and how far away can it be from where people live and things like that. I mean, that's really what we're aspiring to. We have always said that it shouldn't be about what the parents are doing. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, because we do tend to frame it in terms of mothers' labor force participation. And that is an important leading piece, but it's not all there is to it. And when I just want to emphasize that, we always have this balance between, is this a program for children or is it a program for women, or families, women and or families? which is not really the same thing. And I would make the argument that at the level of offering it as a universal program, it needs to be that every child should have the right to go to quality childcare. And I'm just putting a little asterisk next to the quality regulated childcare piece for a second. So I just want to point out that we have a lot of barriers if parents are not employed, for example. If you're a parent who may be eligible for a childcare subsidy, which I will also put an asterisk next to because I think it's a big barrier, there are social criteria that usually mean that the parent has to be gainfully employed. It's a residue of the deserving poor kind of concept. And I think the countries that have really advanced on childcare have to think about it in both ways, that it has to be a right of every child, no matter what the parents are doing or who they are, to actually go to an early childhood education program, but also it has to be set up in such a way so that mothers can actually work or study or train or whatever it is in actually order to use the program. So it has to be a combination. I think that's really important. And one of the things that has come up in years is it's not, we don't think of it as compulsory. There have been instances where countries have thought of childcare as being compulsory, and in a couple of the provinces, going to kindergarten is compulsory. We've never had that debate. We've always assumed it should not be compulsory. There's a lot of issues in there. So you want me to go on and say how does CWEL bring? So we have never had a federal government. We've had federal political parties who have espoused universal childcare for years, but we've never had a political party in power that actually said we are going to bring in a universal childcare system and actually started to put it in place the way has happened now. This is a new thing. It's not that it hasn't been discussed. It's not that federal governments haven't tried in one way or another, but this is the only one that has the amount of meat in it that there is, and that they actually said it is for all. Now, that being said, there's a huge amount of terrain between where we are and actually the aspiration of the way we see it. And that's why this kind of question is really important, because as we're rolling it out, it's really incumbent on us and these governments to actually put the flesh on what do we mean by universal childcare, that every child should be able, 10 years from now should be, because I think that's what it would actually take to build it, should be able to get it. I don't remotely fault the federal government for having started with parental affordability. I think it was the right place to start, and it was certainly true. We haven't achieved it yet, but made a big dent in it, because that was an enormous barrier, not only to low-income parents, but to modest-income parents, and a lot of middle-income parents also were kept out by the high fees. You cannot run childcare on parent fees, and it also kept the wages down because the parents were paying the staff fees, and that's now changed. That being said, even defining what we're talking about, like ultimately, if childcare is a universal and a child's right, it should be defined as an entitlement by public policy. But we're not anywhere at that point yet, and I actually have to say I put it forward as a consideration for the legislation, and nobody wanted to go there because we are very far from making it an entitlement. But it's a question of, like, we really need to be clear about what we're thinking about and make sure that the steps that we're taking bring us in that direction. And it means identifying all these kinds of things that can be changed by public policy. So I think there's a huge number of actions and policies that are needed to be taken to fill in the gaps. I think there's a huge advocacy task in defining all these things and coercing or encouraging the policymakers to make the right kinds of public policy, because that's what we've always done in childcare. We don't envision that we're going to be able to do it ourselves by selling cupcakes. It's going to have to be publicly funded. Well, we have sold cupcakes. You're laughing, Sonya, but we've sold the $250 cupcakes at the Conservative Convention, for example. I mean, what I'm saying is childcare has got to be done through public policy, but it's the task of the advocacy movement to actually define what that's actually going to look like and keep moving us to it. And the biggest actions that we have to take now, I will leave with this, is we need much, much more high quality, not-for-profit and public regulated childcare so that parents can actually get affordable childcare. And while that's being done, we need to keep in mind what kinds of neighborhoods it's being put in so that it becomes more equitably distributed, and what kinds of services it needs to be, and how much money it's really going to take in order to do that. And in order to do that, I guess the biggest looming piece is we have to pay attention to the workforce, because unless we deal with the workforce issues, we're never going to get quality childcare, and we're never going to be able to expand. So that's the short answer to universal childcare and how we're going to get it.
Thank you so much.
In our lifetime.
Thank you so much, Martha. And that makes me think of, we were having this conversation a few days ago about how many people say, I got so lucky, I found childcare, I was one of the lucky ones, and how it is important to reframe the way we think about childcare. And it should be a right, that children are entitled to it.
And it's structural, it's systemic.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much, Martha. I don't know if Thơ or Sonya would like to comment on this. If not, I have another question prepared, and this one, I think it will be helpful to advocates here in this call. So this question is for Thơ. So what are some of the key advocacy priorities of the childcare movement at this moment? To which level of government should we be focusing this advocacy at this point?
Thank you, Gabriela. Before I answer this question, I wanted to sort of continue the thought that Martha has brought up from the last question. I think that for the advocacy movement, it is crucial that we convey a shared message about, as Martha said, how we define universal childcare, and make sure that no one and no communities are left behind. And to do that, it's important to bring the sector together in an intentional and systematic way, as well as bring in people who work in childcare and who use childcare. So that was the thought that came up to my mind when Martha was sharing her piece. And to answer your question, Gabriela, at Childcare Now, we think that expansion is the political priority, because the entire Canada-wide ELCC project is a promise to deliver affordable and publicly funded childcare to all children and families in Canada. So that's what people are watching for. And it's crucial that the project reaches its expansion goal to not be seen as a failure and to survive the next election, but to make childcare more available and access more equitable. As we address in the presentation as well, we need to pressure the governments to do two things. First is to compensate the workforce sufficiently to retain and attract qualified educators who are the heart of the system. And second, we need a publicly managed expansion. Martha also say governments can no longer rely on the not-for-profit sector. It has to be publicly funded and managed to create more spaces for children and family. To answer the question about level of government, I think local advocacy aimed at provincial and territorial governments is very important, as CWELC agreements roll out and action plans are negotiated and implemented at a provincial and territorial level. But we would also like to press that the federal role is not over here, and us advocates should keep the pressure on them to do more. Childcare Now is calling for increased federal spending on the workforce and investment in building not-for-profit and public ELCC. You can read more in Childcare Now full submission for the federal budget, but we are asking for $10 billion over the next 3 years to cover capital costs of increasing the availability of licensed childcare, and for an additional $7 billion over 3 years to fully implement competitive and equitable wage grids for early childhood educators and childcare staff. So I think the upcoming National Day of Action is a perfect opportunity for us to do so, and for advocates across Canada to work together on bringing childcare issues to the forefront. We encourage you all to visit childcarenow.ca, where there will be information about the Day of Action posted this Friday, along with we're going to post a letter to Minister Suds and Freeland supporting our budget demands that I just presented. And once the letter is posted publicly this weekend, we encourage you all to sign on to it. That's it, I think.
Great. Thank you so much. So I think I will be sending over all of the materials that we discussed here today as well in a follow-up email. But yeah, thank you so much for kind of highlighting what are the priorities in the sector. We know that with the prices going down, the demand for childcare has increased, and we know that we can't do it without qualified early childhood educators. And as well as growing the childcare movement into being more diverse and making sure that the voices of historically underrepresented communities are at the forefront of policy making. So with that segue, I want to ask Sonya. So she's with the Coalition of Childcare Advocates, and I wanted to ask, we know that equitable access to early learning and childcare is a barrier for most, but it disproportionately affects different communities across Canada, as we saw in the research findings presented by Martha and Todd. So based on your advocacy experience or the coalition's experience, how do we ensure the voices of these groups are amplified in the movement and also at decision-making tables? What strategies or tools can you share with us that we can implement in our work to ensure that we're amplifying these voices and we can grow the movement into a more powerful movement and diverse movement of early learning and childcare?
Great, thank you. So one of the overarching goals of the coalition is to ensure that our advocacy strategy is both inclusive and representative of the diversity of the children, families, and educators in BC. So what I thought I'd do is take a look at both the internal and external strategies that the coalition is currently working on to amplify these diverse voices. So if we start looking internally, the coalition has been committed to an ongoing process of learning for quite some time. And that process started with rigorous self-reflection with two goals in mind. First, to better understand our own biases, both individually and collectively, but also we wanted to better understand the extent to which the coalition, as both an organization and as a movement, is actually advancing principles of reconciliation, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so the goal here is to identify on both an individual and a systemic level, what are the barriers to representation and inclusion that exist inside the coalition. One of the most significant outcomes of the self-reflection process was to reimagine after 40 years how the coalition will operate moving forward. So part of that work started with working with diverse consultants like me and encouraging us to take on more public-facing and leadership roles within the coalition, which is why I'm talking to you today and not our co-leads, Sharon and Linnell. Also, the coalition pays significant honoraria when they consult with people to inform our work so that we value the contribution of their knowledge, skills, and experience. I think the hard work comes in moving forward and reimagining a new organizational structure in which the coalition is working differently with the communities in which it represents. So the coalition is going to start introducing what we're calling circles, tables, or networks. And these are tools to outreach and engage diverse groups, particularly those groups that have been historically underserved and underrepresented in the childcare sector across the province. Now, this idea of the circles are really important because they provide a rather unique opportunity for underrepresented groups to participate in the day-to-day work of the coalition. And the piece that I find most exciting about the circles is that by changing the structure and the way in which the coalition interfaces with the community it represents, we begin to redefine the distribution of power and influence inside the coalition. And by doing so, the coalition will create opportunities for people to participate in leadership and decision-making roles that influence childcare policy outside the coalition. And that's why it's so important. It's really important to increase not only the inclusion, but the representation of people who who belong to underrepresented groups in leadership and decision-making roles so that they can have an actual real and meaningful impact on childcare policies that affect them. So now I'm going to turn my attention to the external strategies. We started off by conducting a 10-a-day supporter survey. Instead of making the assumption that the coalition represented the diversity of BC children, families, and educators, we asked our supporters how they identified and where they lived. So the findings are not going to surprise you. Most identified as white, heterosexual, in two-parent households living in the lower mainland. In short, our supporters, at least those that responded to the survey, didn't reflect the full diversity of BC. So 2 actions fell out of the 10-a-day supporter survey. The first is we're currently working on a follow-up survey to learn more about how people's lived experience not only shape access to childcare, but also their experience of childcare in the communities in which they live and work. The second action was a focus group. We partnered with Pacific Immigrant Resources Society to conduct a focus group with immigrant and refugee women and educators to inform our advocacy strategy. And the focus group taught us 3 things. First, the need to apply more nuanced understanding of intersectionality. I think like many organizations and equity-seeking groups, the word diversity is often used as an umbrella term to refer to a lot of different things. So one of the things that I noticed is that in the communications of the coalition, the word diversity was used to refer to the concept of intersectionality sometimes. And I think it's really important to differentiate between the concept of diversity and the concept of intersectionality. They're related, but they're different. And the difference is that they relate to very different ways of understanding and addressing inequalities. And that's why it's so important for us to understand the difference. So diversity will focus on respecting, appreciating, valuing differences among children, families, and educators. But when we start talking intersectionality, we start highlighting how those same differences create social inequities for children, families, and educators. So in the focus group, for example, lone parents described how their immigrant or refugee status created a catch-22 that limited their access to employment, education, and childcare in a way that wasn't true for comparison groups. The concept of intersectionality can help the coalition identify the gaps and barriers in existing services, but also policies. So that might overlook what the specific needs of immigrant and refugee children and parents, families, and educators may experience. The second learning is the need to apply both a culturally appropriate and an anti-racist lens to our analysis of childcare policy. Again, these concepts are, well, I think that, you know, culturally appropriate, culturally safe, culturally supportive, the concept of being culturally appropriate I think sometimes people confuse with being anti-racist. Again, the concepts are related, but they're different. Culturally appropriate childcare system emphasizes the importance of respect and embracing cultural diversity. An anti-racist childcare policy emphasizes the importance of dismantling those policies, those procedures, those practices, formal and informal, that perpetuate racism and discrimination, that lead to the unfair and equitable treatment of children, families, and educators. And we need both. Children, families, and educators want their culture to be valued, but they also want to be treated fairly and equitably in childcare settings and in the broader childcare sector. The third learning was applying principles of trauma-informed and violence-informed analyses. These principles consider really the impact of trauma and violence on the lives of our children, families, and educators. Some of the participants who were in the group identified that they came from conflict regions, that were engaged in warfare and political unrest. In some regions, violence, particularly sexual violence, targeted women and girls as a weapon of war. We see it every day on the news, the breakdown of social structures, the access to services during conflicts disproportionately affect women and children, and it makes them more vulnerable to exploitation, abuse, and discrimination. So we need to take that into account when we start talking about designing childcare policies. The key principles of trauma-informed and violence-informed analyses are congruent with much of the mainstream discourse in childcare. They promote safety, equity, healing, resilience, and growth. So in summary, I think that we end up right where we started, in an ongoing process of learning and self-reflection, and identifying the places in which we as individuals and we collectively as an organization and as a movement can break down those barriers to increase access to underrepresented groups, but also create platforms in which we can amplify their voices and subsequent impact on the childcare policies that impact their day-to-day lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonya. Martha or To, would you like to add something to this question?
No, but that was really informative, Sonya. I learned a lot.
Yes, likewise. Thank you, Sonya.
Thank you. I think, yeah, that distinction between anti-racist childcare system is something that I personally haven't heard a lot. We often use the word cultural safety net or culturally responsive, but what are the things that we need to do at a systemic level to address racism and to make sure that these are welcoming space for children and families with different backgrounds? So thank you so much, Sonya, for that. We have a lot of comments, people sharing resources with us. I'll make sure to capture them and send them over from everyone for everyone to have. Right now, we still have a few minutes left, so I'll welcome questions from the audience. If you have any, please feel free to enter them on the chat or in the Q&A box. We still have some minutes with our panelists. In the meantime, I'll ask our panelists if they have any closing remarks for our audience in case we don't receive any questions. I don't see any on the chat so far. So if you have any closing remarks you would like to share with our audience, especially as we prepare for the Day of Action for Early Learning and Childcare, any recommendations you may have?
Can I just say something about the Day of Action? Just thinking about it this way is that it really is an opportunity for people to participate in whichever way they can. It's not what we're not saying, people are not saying everybody show up in the same place. We expect that there'll be all kinds of different actions, and that it's really important for people. I think the reason that the childcare movement in Canada has been really successful, and it it actually has been really successful, is that it shares high-level agreements on policy, like where do we want to go, which is what we're talking about today. But how it gets played out by different players is quite varied. And I think people who don't know how to participate in this should just think about this. You know, you can do it in your child's childcare center, you can do it with a group of friends, you can write a letter, you can pass around the letter that's being written. You know, there's many, many different ways. It's what we want is as varied and diverse. Like, we're trying to build the diversity of the childcare movement. Age-wise, I should add myself, I'm being very aware of this, is that it needs young people. So that is another, kind of thing. And that it really does welcome everybody, but we do share certain ideas about where childcare fits into the world, what type of thing it is, and some of the things about how to get there. And that's why we've been putting out those kind of high-level ideas about childcare. So if that helps about the days of action, we'd really like to let 1,000 flowers bloom on what actually happens.
Thank you, Martha. We actually received a question, and this is directed to any of the panelists. It's, when you talk about childcare, do we consider school-age children as well?
Oh, that's a really great question. So, somebody put that in the chat. So here's the thing about this, is that they've been using, the concept has been used, it's an age, it's 0 to 6. We know that there are children who are 4 and 5 years old now who are in school-age childcare. They're even 3-year-olds, actually, depending on exactly what the definitions are. And we've kind of stopped using the term school-age childcare because some of those kids are preschool-age kids. They could be in a preschool room, but they're actually in a school-age program if there's someplace. And that's the way it's kind of conceived of. And then you have older school-age kids, the ones we've always thought of as school-age, like 6 to 12-year-olds. We haven't really taken that up yet. But we need to. I mean, it's not that some people view it as more important than others. I think it's very important. I just came across an interesting research study, not a Canadian one, but about what a barrier it is for parents of older school age children not to have a good place for them to go after school, and how it continues to impinge on them. So there's lots of pieces of this that we really need to get in place. I think the terrain is open on school-age children because it's actually in the agreements. It's actually was a federal election commitment about 2 federal elections back that something would happen on school-age childcare, and it's in the legislation also, but it hasn't really been taken up yet. So I've been thinking that we need to sort of start thinking about how to take it up sometime over the next year, if that's an answer. I mean, I think people might vary on this, and I don't think we've really discussed it yet. So I'm just offering my own opinion on this. I myself think it's very important. Yeah, Morna's putting in the chat that we've always defined regulated childcare as regulated services from birth to age 12. That's generally the way provinces have defined them broadly, with some variations, but who's in school age and who's not in school age is very variable. So I think there's things to be sorted out, but that doesn't mean that it's not important. I think a lot of people think it's important, and it may not be the same. I just want to say one last thing. It may not just be a continuation of what we do for preschool age children. Personally, I don't think it is. So there's a lot of talking to be done about it.
Thank you so much, Martha, and thank you so much for the question, Caroline. Yeah. We have a few minutes still, so I think this question will be great for Thơ. Maybe she can expand on policy level number 3 and what it means to be non-discriminatory population-based entitlement within a universal system. So I think they're talking about policy level number 3 from the Van der Broek framework. And I have it here. So non-discriminatory population-based entitlement within a universal system of childcare.
You know what that's referring to, Gabriella, if I may say? A lot of the childcare systems that are better developed for older preschool age children than infants and toddlers. Even in better developed, a lot of developed childcare systems, infants and toddlers the staff have less education, less recognition, less funding. They're called split systems. And I think that that's another really important thing. There's been this idea, and it sort of has happened, is that you start education at about age 3 in a lot of countries, but infants and toddlers get left behind. So I think all of these things are majorly important. Moving childcare forward is going to mean the childcare movement making further policy decisions than we ever had, and having some conversation about how we see the best way to move forward with them before it gets to a lot of the policymakers, I would say. My view.
Thank you, Martha. So we're just running up to 2 p.m. So I'll let Thơ and Sonya share some concluding remarks, highlight something they want to share with the audience today, and then we'll just go and say thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. Thơ, would you like to go ahead?
I was going to offer for Sonya to go ahead.
Okay, sounds good.
I think, based on my own experience with the childcare sector, I would, one, thank the people that I've met for being so welcoming, but at the same time offer a challenge or perhaps a call to action, because I know that not everybody feels that the childcare sector is as accessible as they want or need it to be. So I will leave it with that.
Thank you, Sonya.
Thank you, Sonya. I guess something that really stuck with me from the presentation and the panel discussion today was what Sonya was saying about, in order to make childcare inclusive and accessible, the advocacy movement itself has to represent the same values and bring in people from diverse experience and expertise and backgrounds into the movement. And I think that's my takeaway from today, and how I'm going to plan my National Day of Action. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Thơ. Definitely agree. We have very nice comments on the chat. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I have compiled a lot of resources shared in the chat, and I'll also be sharing our paper, Childcare Resource and Research Unit's paper, Childcare for Whom, our website, and all of the other details. I see here some people are asking about advocacy activities. So I will share some of the resources shared by Childcare Now. But for now, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. All right.
Thank you, Gabriella.
Goodbye. Thank you, Martha, Sonya, and Thơ.